finally, our first vulnerability, HTML injection. Now, I already showed you an example of this bug in one of the first videos of the course, and it's very easy to perform. That's why we're starting with it right now. This is first bug that we are going to cover. For all the bugs that we will cover in this course, we will be asking three main questions. What is it? How can we do it? And how do we fix it? These are important questions for us, especially how we can discover a certain bug. Now, luckily HTML injection is not one of those critical vulnerabilities, however it is considered a bug. And we are going to start off by explaining what exactly is it. So, what is it? To describe it in one sentence, we can say HTML injection is injecting HTML code into the website page. Simple as that. How exactly does it work? Well, here's an example. Let's say we have a very simple web page that performs only one task. It asks the client to enter their name inside of a user input field. Once the person enters their name, for example, let's say that they entered a name Tom, the application then outputs Hello Tom. So we notice that this application reflects what we input to the page. We type something in, and the application processes that input and reflects it back in a sentence Hello Tom. So code could look something like this. We have form, where we submit our name, and after the form it will output hello and then whatever we wrote inside of our input field. In our code example, our name is reflected here. But the key part of our code is Tom. That is what we have control of. So then comes the question, what would happen if instead of a regular name we submit an HTML code? In this case, a simple open header of size 1 tags and test written between header tags would be enough. What would happen to the HTML code on the web page if we injected this? What would it reflect then? Well, here is where we decide if the page is vulnerable to HTML injection or not. Our HTML code injected in the page would look something like this, once added to this code example. But the question is, how will the website process it? Is it going to process it as a regular string, or will it process it as an HTML code? If the website processes it as an HTML code and it outputs test written in header size 1, then we can conclude that the web page is vulnerable to HTML injection and that user input field isn't filtered well enough to block HTML tags and HTML code. Okay, this was an example in theory, but right now let's see how that would look like in practice. Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at our first example of HTML injection, but we're also going to take a look at how we can set up and deploy vulnerable virtual machines on our Try Hack Me platform. So first thing to make sure is that you have burp suite turned on, even though we won't need it for this lecture, but it's good practice to get used to using it and having it as a proxy every time you perform some website penetration testing. Then go and log in to your Try Hack Me account. And now we want to see how we can actually deploy their virtual machines and test them. So for this course, we're going to be using OWASP 10 Vulnerabilities Lab, which is free to use on this platform. It is located if you go on Learn, then you navigate to Web Hacking Fundamentals. And under the Web Hacking Fundamentals, if we scroll a little bit down, we're going to see OWASP Top 10, which is the room that hosts top 10 most critical website vulnerabilities. And it's also free to use. So let's click on it. This will be the room that we're going to be doing. And in this specific room, we don't really have an HTML injection. However, we can use a different task that we have right here to demonstrate HTML injection. And that different task is going to be this one, task number 5, Command Injection Practical. Now, just so you don't get confused, we are not yet learning command injection. We're going to be focusing on command injection later in the course. For now on, we want to do HTML injection. And we can also do it on this lab right here. You don't need to read any of this for now. We're going to leave that for later. For now on, we're only interested into starting this machine. But there is one problem with this. Once we start the machine, it will be deployed in their own network. So we must VPN to their network in order to be able to access this machine. How can we do that? Well, it's rather simple. We can do that with the help of OpenVPN that we have inside of our Kali Linux. And they have a good guide on how we can do that. So navigate to this icon right here, then navigate to Access. And here we have the page where we can download our configuration file that we will use to access their VPN server. Here I have my VPN server selected, which is currently this one, and if I click on download my configuration file, it will open this file, which will have my username as well as .ovpn. If we save the file, it will be located in our downloads directory, and all we have to do afterwards is open a terminal, navigate to your downloads directory. If I type ls, here will be the file that I just downloaded. And in order to VPN into their network, we type sudo openvpn and then the file name, which in my case is this one. If I press enter, I enter my password. In just a few seconds, we will have everything set up. And now if we open a third terminal and we type ifconfig, you will see this third interface right here where you will get the IP address from the VPN, which in my case is this one. And this is the IP address that we will use to communicate with the vulnerable virtual machines that we're going to deploy on their network. So now that we did that, we can refresh this, and hopefully if we did everything correctly, this should update our information. We're currently connected to their VPN server, and this is our Kali Linux IP address. Okay, now let's go back to the lab. Now that we did all of this, let's navigate again to Web Hacking Fundamentals. Let's go to OWASP Top 10. And as already mentioned before, to demonstrate HTML injection, we're going to start this machine under task 5. Let's start it by clicking on this start button. And it will say starting your machine, please wait. In a few seconds, we're going to see this tab right here. It will say that the machine expires in 59 minutes, so that is how long we have to solve our task. Even though we're not really doing the command injection task, but this is how long the machine will stay up. And the IP address of the machine will be shown in 39 seconds. So all we have to do for now is to wait for this timer to go to 0 in order to be able to see the IP address of our target machine. And here it is. I got my IP address of my virtual machine. Now it gives you this option to copy it. And the first thing that I always like to do with this is I like to try to ping that IP address, because sometimes it might take a couple of minutes for you to be able to communicate with this machine. You won't be able to communicate with it straight away, so pinging or visiting the HTTP web page won't really work. As we can see right here, I'm still not able to ping it. So let's wait for a couple more seconds, and hopefully in a minute or two we should be able to visit the web page of this IP address, and also we should be able to ping it. Okay, a few minutes went by, and let's try it again. If I ping the IP address, now we have established connection and we can communicate with this machine. Awesome. Let's Control-C this, and the next thing that we want to do is visit the web page on this machine. Now, for the command injection part, if we go to the task that we have, we would be visiting this link right here. But we're not really interested in performing command injection right now. We will do that later. For now, we want to perform HTML injection. So what I want you to do is I want you to copy the IP address of your machine and add / at the end. Press enter, and it should load this page that says directory search. It's a very simple web page. As we can see, we do have a user input right here. We can type something in, and then we have a button to submit. So let's type, for example, test. Click on submit. and we get an error. User test was not found on the system. Now, what does this tell us? If we go back to our theory video of HTML injection, we remember that if our input that we specified reflects somewhere on the web page, we can try and test for HTML injection, and our test was reflected here. So what would happen if we, for example, typed HTML code? Let's give it a try. Let me just zoom this in so we can see everything better. And I'm going to type h1 and then close header tags and then capital test and then close header tags again. So we have open header tags for the h1 header size. We have test and close h1 tags. Let's submit this. And here it is. We get test printed in header of size 1. So that means this is vulnerable to HTML injection. And just in case you're not sure, we can do something like this, for example, h1, and then we can also underline to see whether it will process the underline tags of HTML code and if it will underline our test string. Don't forget to close both underline tag and header 1 tag, and if we submit, well, here it is. We get our test string underlined. This means this web page is vulnerable to HTML injection. And this is the most simple example that we can have. Nonetheless, we're going to take a look at some other examples and some other possibilities with HTML injection in the next videos, but for now on, we'll learn how we can deploy our virtual machines inside of our TryHackMe account, and we also learned how we can connect to its VPN. Remember that you will have to do this every time you start TryHackMe. But once you downloaded this file that we have right here, you can always use the same file. Just also make sure that you use the same VPN server. You just run this command every time you want to use TryHackMe, and it will connect to their VPN, which will allow you to access their machines whenever you start them. Okay, awesome. Now that we got that out of the way, let's see an example of HTML injection on our OWASP BWA virtual machine. See you in the next video. Welcome back. Let's see a different example of finding HTML injection vulnerability. For this, we're going to need our OWASP virtual machine, so make sure that it is started. Make sure that you have burp suite started right here and that intercept is turned off. Now what we want to do is we want to navigate to the IP address of our OWASP virtual machine. Then we want to navigate to OWASP mutilde 2. And you will notice that right here, if we go to OWASP 2013 and A1 injection, we will have multiple examples of HTML injection, or should I say multiple practice examples of it. Let's go to, for example, this one. Let's go to HTML injection and then browser info. If I click on that, it will open a page that it should be vulnerable to HTML injection, right? But compared to the last example that we saw, here we don't really see any user input that we can use to inject code. We can't enter our HTML code anywhere on this page. So what are we going to do? Well, let's take a look at the page a little bit closer. If we take a look at all of the information that we have right here, we're going to notice something quite familiar for us, which is this user agent string. It appears to be our user agent, or us. Now, if we remember, in the HTTP headers, there is a user agent header that has this information for us. So could it be that perhaps the user agent header is getting reflected on this page? I mean, we can give it a try. Let's see what happens once we reload this page while intercept is turned on. So let's go to our burp suite, turn on the intercept, and let's reload this page. So straight away we get this HTTP request, and this is the same request for this page since we tried to reload it. Now let's compare this information right here, which is the user agent string, with the user agent string that we got in our HTTP headers. So here it is. As we can see, it's pretty much the same thing. So even though we don't have a user input field on our web page, could we possibly try to inject HTML code in the user agent field? Well, let's give it a try. If I delete the current user agent and I type h1 tags and then test, and then I close h1 tags, and let's also, for the purposes of this tutorial, add the underline tags just so we can see whether it will also underline it. So if we open the tags, we must also close them. And once we inject this, hopefully, if it gets reflected on this page, we're going to see test written in header size 1 and also underlined. Let's give it a try. Let's forward this packet and turn off the intercept. Go back to the page, and here it is. We get test reflected as an HTML code. How cool is that? We didn't use any user input field on the page, but we still managed to inject HTML code through HTTP headers. Awesome. This is just another example of HTML injection, and in the next video, we're going to take a look at even more interesting example and more useful example of HTML injection. See you in the next video. Welcome back. Let's take a look at a different usage of HTML injection and what else can we do with it once we find it out. Well, let's take a look at a different example this time. So in the last video, we injected our HTML code in the user agent HTTP header field. And that is when we found out that it's possible to inject HTML code without having any user input field. We just intercept the request in our burp suite and we injected the HTML code in our user agent field. Now let's take a look at another example. So navigate once again to OWASP Mutil-Day2. Let's go to the HTML injection and let's try this one. HTML injection via cookie injection. That is the one that we haven't tried yet. So let's go on capture data page and let's take a look at this page. So once again, we don't really have any user input field that we can type our HTML code in. But we do get this printed out. And if we take a look at a little bit closer to here, we'll have this data or this string written on this page. Now, what does this look like? Well, it looks like a cookie value. As we can see, PHP session ID, and then we get the value right here. So could it be that our cookie value reflects on this page? Well, we already know how we can check that. We can simply just intercept the request inside of the burp suite. So let's reload the page, and here we get the request. Here is the PHP session ID. And let's compare these values right here. And that's pretty much it. This is getting reflected on this page. So we already know how we will go about doing this. We would just inject our HTML code, we would reflect the HTML code on the page, and we would conclude that the page is vulnerable. But let's try to inject something else than just HTML headers. Let's try to redirect this page to google.com with the help of HTML code. So how we can do that? Well, we can write this code. Let me just open Notepad, or not notepads, let me open Nano real quick. HTML redirect code.txt, code.txt, and we are going to write this code. So open tags meta http-equiv equals open double quotes refresh close double quotes, then let's add space content equals 5, and we're going to explain this in just a second. It's rather simple. Then semicolon, and then URL equals https://www.google.com. Close double quotes and close the HTML tags. So what are we doing right here? Well, first of all, let me just delete these two dots. We don't need two of them. One is just enough. And what this code does is it refreshes the page where we inject this code and redirects it to google.com. And this content equals 5 is simply just the amount of seconds that it's going to wait before it redirects the page. If we write 5, it will wait for 5 seconds and then it will redirect the page. If we set right here 1 or 0, it will redirect it straight away. So let's give it a try. Instead of injecting HTML header size 1, like we did in the previous video, let's try to inject this under the cookie value inside of our HTTP request. And here it is. Okay, let's forward this. And let's turn off the intercept. Navigate right here, and in 5 seconds, this page should get redirected to google.com. Here it is. We didn't type anything, it redirected automatically due to our code being processed as an HTML. Now, if you want to, you can do this. Let me just go back via cookie injection, capture data, let's intercept the request, and let's refresh the page. You can also do this straight away. You don't need to wait for 5 seconds in order to redirect the page. All you have to do is navigate to the content and change it to 0. Then forward the request or turn off the intercept, go back, and it will get redirected straight away. How cool is that? Okay, so this was another tag that we could have done with HTML injection. We can simply just redirect the page. And we also saw another way that we can perform HTML injection, which is through the cookie value. We changed the cookie value with the HTML code and it got executed because it got reflected on our page. Awesome. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at another example of HTML injection, and then in a video or two, we're about to move on to the next, more serious and dangerous vulnerability. See you in the next lecture. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at 2 more examples of HTML injection. And with this, we're going to finish off with this vulnerability. Now, before we start off with these examples, it's important to notice that this is not the most critical vulnerability that we can find on a page, but we did start with it just because it's simple to perform. The effect that it can have is, well, with HTML injection, you can pretty much change anything on the page. You can change the HTML code, you can make it redirect to a different page that we saw an example in the previous video. So what you can, for example, do is you can create a fake page that looks exactly like the page that you're testing. You can add a form, perhaps a login form there, and then you can redirect the real page to the fake page that looks exactly the same, and the user that gets redirected won't really notice anything. They might type their information such as usernames and passwords on the fake page, and you would be able to get all of that. And that is the power of HTML injection, because a regular user won't really see the difference between a real page and a fake page. Nonetheless, enough of talking, let's get straight into these 2 examples. So the first one that I want to show you is once again under the injection, and then let's go HTML via DOM injection. And let's select HTML5 storage. Here we do have some web storage, and if we type something in these user input fields and click on add, it will get reflected on this table that we can see on this page. Now, there are a few things that we might notice right here. There are a couple of things reflecting. We have our test getting reflected here and here. We also get test getting reflected here. But we also get our user agent field getting reflected here. Now, we will not be injecting this because we already saw an example of injecting the user agent field. It would probably work and we could probably reflect our HTML code right here. But let's give it a try under these 2 tabs. So the first thing that we will notice is that if we turn on the intercept and we type something in, well, we didn't really intercept anything. Our request didn't get interrupted. We simply just added another test value on this storage. But even though we can't really intercept this request, we can still try to write HTML code. And let's copy this right here and paste it on the second input tab as well. And we do get HTML injection, we just don't get it here. We get it right here. As we can see, our input got filtered and it simply just added our HTML code as a regular string. but here where it also reflects, we got test written in header size 1 tags. Okay, so this was a simple example. We got our HTML code right here, so we know that it's vulnerable to the HTML injection. But let's take a look at more advanced example. To navigate to that more advanced example, even though even that one is rather easy, we can go to the injection, and let's go, for example, to the first one, and let's go to this one, those back buttons. Click on that. Whoops, we still have intercept on. Let's turn it off. And this is the page that we get. Once again, no user input fields. So what are we going to inject? We can't even see in this text that anything from our headers gets reflected. Well, besides this one, which is standard thing on every page that we visit, we're just going to ignore it at the moment. But if we read this discussion right here, it says the large back button image appears automatically on most pages, and they're probably referring to this arrow and this back button right here. If the image is clicked, the user is redirected to the previous page. The button works by executing a JavaScript statement which sets document.location.href equal to the HTTP header refer. This might already give us enough information. If we give it a try, for example, let's turn on the intercept and we click this back button. If we find the refer header, which is right here, well, it is correct. We do get the link to the page that we want to visit, which is the previous page to this one. Since we clicked the back button, it will redirect us to the previous page, and the link to that previous page is in the refer of our HTTP headers. But how does that help us? It doesn't get reflected anywhere on the page. At least this link doesn't get reflected anywhere on the page. Or does it? Well, let's take a look. Let's go right here and let's go under the inspect element. And for the inspect element to work better, let us just turn off the intercept and go back to our those back buttons example. So here it is. Let's go on it and let's try to find the code of this back button. So usually just by going over these lines of code, you will be able to select different parts of pages. So let's just select this one, since it's the entire page. Let's go to this one, as it also takes our back button inside. And let's go to this one next, and this one. Here we should be able to find the div open tag, which covers our button, which in our case is this one right here. And here's the button. If we click on lower arrow, we're going to get this OpenA tags that says onClick document.location.href, and here is where our refer link gets reflected. It is right here in our HTML code. We can see it inside the A tags. But how can we inject right here? Well, we could try to inject a simple HTML code in the refer button, but you will notice that it won't work if I type h1 and then test and then close h1 tags and forward the packet. Then turn off the intercept and navigate back to the page. Well, we didn't really get our HTML code reflected anywhere. So could it be that it's not vulnerable? Well, let's give it a closer look to our code. So here is our button where we now injected the HTML code instead of the refer link, which will lead us to the previous page, and it looks like this. So we have open A tags, onClick, document.location.href, and under the open single quotes, this is equal to our HTML code, as we can see right here. So let's copy this line of code. I'm not sure what I copied, but we're going to give it a try. Let's go nano HTML code.txt just so we can write our HTML payload right here. And for some reason I copied this, but nonetheless I'm just going to type it in so we can see it better. Okay, I wrote the entire code right here. So this is how it looks like. But we can see that this HTML code that we injected belongs to this document.location.href. So in order for our HTML code to get processed as an HTML code, we must escape these A tags and this document.location somehow. Well, here's what we can do. Let's try to write our payload down here. So it will start with onClick. Oops, and I misspelled right here. So onClick document.location.href equals open single quote. And the first thing to notice is that this document starts with double quotes. So perhaps what we can do is we can make it end right here by adding the closing double quotes, instead of just starting to write our HTML code right here. So now perhaps if we write our HTML code, it would look something like this, right? So our document.location should end right here, but we still got our HTML code between the A tags. So what we can do is we can also close the A tags right here. After the double quote that we injected, we can type closing tags that we have right here and closing A tags. Now, you might notice some similarities because we pretty much just moved this entire part of characters right before our HTML code. As you can see right here, here was it before, and now we have it here. So we're essentially making this open A tags with the document location end sooner. And as soon as it ends with this line, we are moving on to our next line of HTML code that we are injecting. So our final payload will look something like this. We want to inject this into the page. Open h1 tags. This is our payload. Let's see if it works. So if we copy it, go back to the page, turn on the intercept, we can lower this, refresh the page, and under the refer, we don't really need to remove this link. We can just append our payload straight at the end of the link. So let's go paste, and here it is. We got double quotes, close tags, close A tags, open header1 tags, we wrote test, and we closed header1 tags. Let's forward this packet and turn off the intercept, and we go back. Here is our HTML code getting reflected on the page. We successfully performed HTML injection that we couldn't get to work at the beginning. And this right here is the leftover code that we pretty much cut off once we injected our HTML code. And in order for us to take a look at how this code looks in the HTML page, we can navigate to our button, which is right here, and here is the open A tags that we have before. We closed it right here, as we can see. This is the first part of our code where we closed the double quotes and we closed the A tags. And down here it processed our h1 headers with test written inside of it. So it processed it as HTML. And here is that leftover part that we cut off from this line right here. So once again, in case you're confused, what we did is we took the original code, which looked like this once we inject our h1 headers. We moved the closing tags before we type in our HTML code. Then it closed this entire line of A tags and it processed our HTML code as a separate line and it wrote it on the page right here. So this was a little bit more advanced example of HTML injection, and with this we are done with this vulnerability. So it was rather easy to perform, as we already mentioned, but it does not have that big of an impact. The best thing that you can do with this is pretty much change stuff on the page or redirect the page. Nonetheless, if you want, you can take a look at the other examples of HTML injection on this and on other pages of our vulnerable virtual machine. You can see there are too many. Of course, we're not going to cover all of them, so you can practice this vulnerability on different examples. And we are going to continue with the next vulnerability in the next section, which is going to be a more serious and a more dangerous one. and it is called command injection. See you in the next lecture.